becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
What's stopping you?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. If that's you, if you are non-Catholic, maybe you were a Catholic years ago, an active Catholic, stepped away from the faith for whatever reason, or maybe you've never been a Catholic, but you've got some questions about the Catholic faith, we are here for you, okay? We are one of your sources to get those questions answered. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. If you're watching us on TV today, you can participate as well. Shoot us an email. I'd love to get it from you at ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. Matt Gabinski is our phone screener. Jeff Burson handles social media for us. If you want to ask a question via YouTube or Facebook, we are streaming there right now. Just ask your question by putting it in the comments box. Jeff will see it. He'll shoot it to us here in the studio, and hopefully we can get it answered on today's program. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Very well. How are you, my friend?
You know, I'm doing pretty well, thanks.
Got an interesting email here from Thomas. Thomas says, it's hypocritical for Dr. Anders to accuse Protestants of proselytizing when he does it every day on his show. Even the show's slogan, "What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?" is an obvious invitation to proselytize by professional persuader Dr. Anders. The only difference I see between Dr. Anders now and Dr. Anders back when he was a Protestant is that he's wearing a different team's jersey and maligning his former squad based on his jaded experience in that faith tradition. Perhaps Dr. Anders can explain the difference between proselytizing and the genuine heartfelt desire to share one's faith to show that you are not ashamed of the gospel. And again, that is from Thomas.
I love this question. This is a magnificent question. I'm so excited to get it. Thank you, Thomas. It's great. Okay, so I will tell you the difference in my experience, and I think of the teaching of the church. Before I was Catholic, in the tradition that I came from, I felt like making other people become my religion was a spiritual duty incumbent upon me, right? And what that entailed, given where I was at the time, the particular spirituality, was that I tried to coerce people into praying the sinner's prayer. And this is a tradition in Protestantism of saying, "Lord, I'm a sinner. I can't save myself. Please come into my life and forgive my sins. Amen." So words to that effect. And it was like, we kind of instrumentalized the thing, gotten it down to a formula. You get somebody to say that with sincerity, and you'd done the deed. You'd converted them to Christ. That was the understanding. And so I had a personal onus, an agenda, to get people to pray the sinner's prayer by whatever means necessary. And on one occasion, I was still Protestant. I met a Catholic girl in a class preparing for the GRE. And she found out I was a church history student in seminary and told me she was Catholic. And I was like, great, I'm going to pounce. And I knew the Bible a lot better than she did, which is a common story with Protestants and Catholics. Plus, I was a seminarian, and I knew my theological chops pretty well. And, she's just some Catholic layperson. Probably didn't know her faith that well. And I just kind of wrapped her around my little theological finger. And before we'd finish the break and go back to class, I'd got this girl to play the sinner's prayer.
Wow.
Now, here's the telling part of the story. I don't know her name. You know why? I didn't care about her as a human being.
Just one more notch on the gun barrel.
It was a notch on the gun barrel.
Yeah.
I didn't know her story. I didn't ask where she grew up. I didn't ask about her relationship with God or if she had one. I didn't ask about her family. I didn't ask her what her spiritual needs were. I didn't ask her what her aspirations were. I didn't care. I didn't care about her as a human being. I cared about her as an object, like a mark that a carnival barker would try to entice, to come play the the beanbag toss in my booth so I can make a buck off of you. Or an Amway salesman. Nothing to knock Amway. You know what I mean? Door-to-door salesman. He's just trying to make a buck, right? That's how I view it as kind of like a spiritual conquest. Now, how do I see things today? And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Like, I believe the Catholic faith, right? But I don't have an agenda to make anybody Catholic. That may seem strange given what I do for a living, but I really don't. I really don't. And I don't presume that non-Catholics are going to hell. I don't know that I'm going to heaven. The whole I'm in the good camp and you're in the bad camp thing, like, I gave that up years ago to the liberation of my soul and many others. It makes me a nicer person. Like, when I talk to another human being, my interest now genuinely is I'd kind of like to know where they're coming from. And do we have something in common that we could talk about and maybe we could be friends? And how can I help you? Not just in some very narrow, reductive sense of, can I help you get to be like me in this one aspect? But how can I help you in your total integral humanity? You have a need that I can meet. You have some interest that we can share. And in the process of that loving friendship, my Catholicism, I really wear it on my shirt sleeve, and it's going to come out that I'm Catholic, and I have Catholic ways of looking at things and problems, and I'll naturally share those. And if something in what I say is of value to you, well, that's great. And I don't even try to force people to take the whole package. So like somebody says, Anders, I really don't like anything about your Catholic faith except this one Thomistic doctrine that you mentioned. That makes sense to me. Well, great. Take that one doctrine and run with it. I hope that serves you well, you know? And so what I do on this show is I share people the reasons that I became Catholic and the things about the Catholic faith that I find compelling and beautiful. Pope Benedict said that the church should grow not through proselytism, but through attraction. And so that's really my frame of reference. I want to show that the faith, as I understand it, is attractive and it's beneficial, and people who find that useful are welcome to join. And we show them how to do that. But I don't have an agenda to force somebody through the door through any means necessary. And so for me, at least, there's a profound difference in my attitude about the behavior that I'm engaged in. Granted, I'm trying to make a strong case for the Catholic faith.
Sure.
But I really am disinterested in what the results are.
Okay. Hey, Thomas, thank you so much for your email. Certainly very provocative there. If you would like to send us an email for a future show, we'd love to talk with you and hear from you. The address ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Today we're taking your phone calls at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Lines are open for you right now on Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
Tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show.
We'll celebrate the feast of St. Edith Stein, also known as St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. We'll also get more thoughts on prayer from Father Boniface Hicks and look at suffering and martyrdom in the Bible with Steve Ray from CatholicConvert.com. Plus all the latest news, weather, sports, and a whole lot more. Join us.
The Sunrise Morning Show, tomorrow at 6 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Here's Sarah, a real mom with real reasons for sending her kids to a Catholic school.
I grew up going to public schools and my husband grew up going to Catholic schools. I think what sets the Catholic schools apart academically are the expectations on the students. Catholic students from our school learn how to study at a young age. They learn how to manage homework and manage their time in order to accomplish the homework they're given. I understand that several of the high school valedictorians in the area have actually attended Catholic elementary and grade schools. So I think that just is a great example of how our students fare out there in the world, and whether they continue to a Catholic high school or continue on to a public school. They're very well prepared, no matter their choice.
Contact a Catholic school near you. Take a tour and ask questions. Explore financial aid options that may be available. You just might find your own real reasons to choose Catholic education for your child. To find a Catholic school near you, visit the website for your diocese or archdiocese.
Glad you could join us for Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. We do have lines open for you right now if you have a question for Dr. David, and that number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Alexander is watching us today on YouTube. Hey, Alexander. Alexander says, can you explain how I, as a Catholic, could explain to a Protestant the sacrifice of the Mass and that we are not re-sacrificing Jesus?
Absolutely. So the teaching of the Church is that the sacrifice of the Mass is the memorial, the commemorative representation of Jesus' death. It is not causing his death.
Memorial.
So this is what Pope Pius XII says. I'm going to read you from papal encyclical Mediator Dei. For by the transubstantiation of bread into the body of Christ and wine into his body and blood are both really present. So that's the doctrine of transubstantiation. We all believe that as Catholics. Now the Eucharistic species, now what's a Eucharistic species? That's the visible elements that still remain on the altar. What looks like bread, what looks like wine. Now the Eucharistic species under which he is present, and this is the Pope's language, okay, symbolize the actual separation of his body and blood. Thus, the commemorative representation of his death, which actually took place on Calvary, is repeated in every sacrifice of the altar. So what is the Pope saying? Because we have bread over here and wine over there, bread which both becomes his body and is the symbol of his body, wine which both becomes his blood and is the symbol of his blood, the body and blood are represented, shown forth, demonstrated, displayed for us on the altar in a state of separation. Body over here, blood over there. So the death of Christ, the actual historical death that took place on Calvary, which is the separation of his body from his blood, right, is represented by the double consecration of the elements, bread over here, wine over there. But in terms of the substance of Christ, who's actually present on the altar, it is Christ whole and entire. Jesus, seated at the right hand of the Father, as he now lives, is living and present to us on the altar. So we don't have a dead Jesus on the altar. We have a living Jesus on the altar, but in a manner that commemorates his historical death. Okay, now that's critical. St. Thomas Aquinas says the same thing in question 83 of the Summa, part 3. He says the celebration of the sacrament is called a sacrifice because the images of things are called by the names whereof they are images. In the same way that we would say, look at this is Thomas I'm quoting here, we look at a picture or a fresco and say that's Cicero or that's Sallust. Okay? So it is a sacrifice, but in an analogous way, not through the immolation of a victim, but by the commemorative representation of the physical immolation of a victim. So that's critical. It's Thomas's doctrine. It's the doctrine of Trent. It's the doctrine of Pope Pius XII. There's another respect in which we can connect Calvary and the Mass and the sacrifice of the altar, and that is through the sacrament, the power of Christ's sacrifice, the effect of Christ's sacrifice, the atoning value of Christ's sacrifice is made effective in us. So the sacrifice of the Mass as a sacrament, which conveys grace, conveys to us the effects of his actual sacrifice on the cross 2,000 years ago, right? And here's a third way. The performance of the rite, the actual performance of the ritual of the Mass in itself has a distinct propitiatory character, so that God regards the action, and this is what Luther objected to, as a work of value. So it's something that we do for God. It's something that we offer to God, and thus has the character of a sacrifice, but not the kind of sacrifice that requires the actual physical death or immolation of a victim. So that's the Catholic position.
All right.
And that's not what most Protestants think about the Catholic position. Most Protestants believe that Catholics understand themselves to actually be immolating Jesus, but we don't think that.
All right, very good. Alexander, thank you so much for your question via YouTube today. It's called to communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. In a moment, we're going to get to the phones. First, this question from Aaron watching us today on YouTube. Hey, Aaron. Aaron says, is it okay for a Catholic to baptize their child at home if their non-Catholic spouse is against baptizing them at a Catholic church?
Thank you. So there really is only one provision for a layperson baptizing their child at home, and that is when the child is in danger of death. So that's really the only provision for doing that. And the duty of Catholic parents is to bring their children for baptism to the church to be baptized by a priest or deacon. Now, here's what I advise if someone is in this situation. Is there a priest that you know, that you trust, that you have a good relationship with, whose pastoral judgment you think is wise? Call this priest up and say, this is my situation. I want my child baptized in the Catholic faith. My spouse is deeply opposed. Can you help us come up with some kind of mediating circumstance?
Okay.
Where they're, like maybe the priest could agree to baptize the child someplace other than the parish. There are ways to skin this goat.
Okay. Well, that's certainly good news. And Aaron, thanks so much for checking us out today on YouTube. Here's an email now from Helen. In Matthew 24, Jesus says, "But about that day or hour no one knows, not the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father." Well, if Jesus and the Father are one, how can the Father know something that Jesus does not?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. This is, of course, something that Catholic theologians have wrestled with for a very long time, and they've proposed a couple of different answers. Here's one of them. Christ as a human being, and he is, of course, fully human, and that includes having a human mind and a human brain, is someone that can learn. He can grow, he can develop. I'm not a cognitive psychologist, I'm not a neurologist. I don't understand what I'm talking about here, but my understanding is, when we acquire things, we put things in memory, particularly things like physical actions, even neural pathways get laid down in the brain. We actually grow neurons in the brain that facilitate doing that in the future. So you look at piano players, for example, that their brains are not shaped they're shaped differently from non-piano players, okay? And they develop neural capacities through, thousands of hours of use that don't come built in. You have to develop those. There's no reason to think that just because Jesus as God knew everything there's to know about pianos, which of course he did, right? The human brain of Jesus did not come fully loaded with the skill of a professional piano player. Like, as a human being, Christ could have, if he decided to spend his time this way, he could have practiced the piano, and he could have acquired the skill, grown the neural pathways, changed his brain. Acquired knowledge was something that was available to him as a human. If that were not the case, he wouldn't have been human.
I see.
Right? So we talk about the acquired knowledge of the human mind of Christ. The human mind of Christ had not acquired any public revelation about the timing of the second coming, any more than any other human had that acquired knowledge, right? But as God, he would have had, his omniscient divine knowledge of that event, and that's just not what he was talking about in this instance.
All right, very good. Glad we could clear that up. Thanks so much for your question. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin here with John in Vancouver, Washington, listening on the great Modern Day Radio. Hey, John, what's on your mind today, sir?
Good afternoon to you. Good morning to us on the West Coast.
Howdy.
Okay, this is a question on behalf of my son, Mark, who's 52-year-old, cradled Catholic, not practicing. He was here last week. We were going to call in together, but things happened at home and we couldn't make it during the show. So I'm going to read Mark's statement. He laid out a statement for me. I don't want to misrepresent him. He says,
Okay.
I am someone who is now 52, grew up in a Catholic environment, and attended Catholic college in the late 1980s. And he had all the sacraments through confirmation. No, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Since that time, we have become aware that some of our clergy were committing egregious acts against the faithful, and therefore were in an ultimate state of sin while administering our various sacraments. So it happened with the folks at the Catholic University, and it happened in his high school years in the case of the bishop. So he says, while I was not a victim, it begs the question how clergy in this severe state of sin can successfully administer any sacraments. It would seem to me that sacraments administered by clergy in this state of sin would be invalid or null. Please explain, and I'm taping it so my son can hear it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I really appreciate the question. So obviously this is a very old problem in the Catholic Church. It predates the current crop of scandals that we had in the last 20 years. And the problem really came to a head theologically in the 4th century in North Africa, because there was a group called the Donatists that maintained this position. They said, well, for a priest's sacraments to be valid, he has to be morally pure. Only our priests are morally pure. You Catholics don't have morally pure priests. Therefore, only our sacraments are valid. Now, St. Augustine was the Catholic sort of opponent to that position. He laid out what is now the Orthodox Catholic response. It boils down to this. If the priest had to be morally pure to validly celebrate the sacraments, no one would ever be able to know that they'd had a valid sacrament. Because, okay, so let's say the priest who baptizes you, the priest who marries you, the priest who gives you communion or absolves you, he dies in good standing and he's buried and everybody mourns him and you move on. Does that give you certainty that secretly he wasn't in mortal sin? No, it just means you don't know that he was in mortal sin, but it's certainly possible that he was.
Sure.
And so you would never have certainty. Now, the whole force and value of a sacrament, well, not the whole force and value, but a significant portion of it, is that it is a sign. Now, it's a supernatural sign, it's an efficacious sign, but it works in our psychology, in our cognition, through its signification. And so it's necessary that we have certainty about the validity of the sacrament to know that the sign has been presented and the grace has accompanied it so that I can interiorize it and make it active in my life. I need to have objective certainty in the validity of the sacrament for it to do its work properly in me.
Mm-hmm.
And but the moral status of the priest is not something about which I can ever be objectively certain. So the demand that the priest be morally perfect for the validity of the sacrament runs contrary to the very nature of a sacrament, which is to give me something objective that I can be sure of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, so validity is not necessary for the priest to be in the state of grace to offer the sacraments validly. But now I need to draw a distinction. There is a distinction between the validity of a sacrament and its efficacy. Because it is evident that two people can receive a valid sacrament, and it can have a greater effect in one person than another. One person goes to heaven, one person receives the same valid sacrament and goes to hell. All right? It wasn't as effective in one person as another. Now, there can be lots of reasons for that, mostly on the part of the recipient, right? Whether they cooperate with the grace that's been offered to them.
Mm-hmm.
But the holiness of the priest can also have some meaning here, right? Let's say you are confirmed by an immoral priest who is bitter and prejudiced and self-seeking and narcissistic and self-aggrandizing or whatever.
Mm.
And so while he's celebrating the sacrament, he's also scandalizing you. Well, obviously, that's going to have an effect on your ability to assimilate the grace of the sacrament. If you become scandalized, you're far less likely to cooperate with the grace that was given to you.
Mm-hmm.
And thus, it is profoundly important that priests be properly disposed to celebrate the sacraments and do so worthily, because the scandal they cause to the faithful can be very, very, very damaging, can be devastating. And so just because their sacraments are valid does not give them a pass on their immoral behavior. And that's why Christ said, if you cause one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around your neck.
Yeah. John, thanks so much for your call from Vancouver. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on EWTN. Janet sent us an email. Did God, presumably here God the Father, did God know that the Blessed Mother would say yes to becoming the mother of Jesus? And if we have free will, how could she have been immaculately conceived ahead of time?
Sure. Appreciate the question. Yes, God knew that the Blessed Virgin would say yes. How does God's foreknowledge not interfere with our freedom? Well, I'll give you a human analogy. if you have a child, have you ever been morally certain that your kid would take a particular course of action without actually causing that course of action? Example, if I offered my son, my youngest son, would you rather have peas and mushrooms or ice cream? I am morally certain that he would choose the ice cream. But my knowledge that he's choosing the ice cream does not make him choose the ice cream. I'm not compelling him to do it just because I foreknow it.
I see. Very good. Janet, thanks so much for your email. I've got some phone activity here. We're going to go to Merle in just a moment. Merle is in Toronto. Also, Vicki listening in Wilmington, North Carolina. Sam is in Austin, Texas. And we've got another one here from Texas. Lots more straight ahead on this edition of Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. If you want to sneak in here, we have two lines open at 833-288-EWTN. Do stay with us.
We live in a world of extreme polarization, often consumed by anger and anxiety, a climate that is dividing our country and our world, a division so wide there is even confusion within our church. And today, most secular news sources only serve to deepen this divide. But at Catholic News Agency, our mission is to be a witness to the truth of our Catholic faith, providing trustworthy, relevant, and timely news affecting the global church, as well as in-depth coverage of the Pope, the Vatican, the Church in the U.S., and the ongoing battle for the culture of life. Every day, CNA's reporters and editors maintain a continuous, faithful watch on the people and the events that impact lives and the souls of Catholics, delivering more news from a Catholic perspective than anyone else. Catholic News Agency, a service of EWTN News. Trusted, timely, Catholic. Engage at CatholicNewsAgency.com.
Want to be notified when Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders goes live on Facebook? Follow EWTN Radio's Facebook page and click the bell icon to be notified.
EWTN is everywhere. EWTN radio programming is provided free of charge to over 500 domestic and international AM and FM radio stations. It's a great teaching tool for Catholics and non-Catholics alike. For a complete list of EWTN AM and FM stations across America, visit EWTNradio.net. At the bottom of the page, click Affiliates. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Tomorrow on More to Life, compassion fatigue.
Is caring for the people who depend on you wearing you out? We'll help you find a better balance.
That's tomorrow on More to Life. Now back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Hey, what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Let's talk about that on EWTN's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Our phone number here, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here is Merle in Toronto listening on YouTube today. Hey there, Merle. What's on your mind?
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry. A miracle happened to me. If you could recall that on Canada Day, July 1st, I was crying about my two worldly sons.
Yes.
My son, the eldest, came to me and said, Mom, we're going to Mass today and I will be confessing. And I thought I was dreaming. Well, he did. He confessed and attended Mass and received communion after many years of proclaiming that he was a Marxist communist. But anyway, that's not my question today. I would like to thank you for praying for my son, John, who has returned to, both my boys were cradle Catholics and they were sacristans. Now, my question is about a cousin, my first cousin. He was living a homosexual lifestyle. And then he had a coma because of heart stroke, and I worried about his salvation. So I urged my cousins, call a priest immediately before he goes. And they did, but he was already comatose. Do you think he was saved?
I appreciate the question. Thank you. I really don't presume that anyone is saved unless the church canonizes them. No, I don't preserve the damned either. Like I try to not pass judgment on any soul because this is really God's job, right?
Sure.
So the church teaches that sexual activity outside of its sacramental context, well, not sacramental, outside its lawful context within marriage, whether sacramental marriage or otherwise, and I should say even within marriage, sexual activity has to be ordered towards the good of procreation and the self-giving of person towards the good of their spouse and the good of their family. It can't be selfish and self-seeking and prideful and things like that. But anyway, outside those proper contexts, human sexual activity is objectively disordered and immoral. Now, but it also teaches that for somebody to be completely culpable, sort of mortally culpable for sin, one has to act understanding the gravity of what they do without compulsion, so that they have to know it's grave. They have to act without compulsion, have to act freely. And I'm never in a position to determine the answer to those two questions. I can evaluate if the church tells me the gravity of an act, but I really can't address the internal question of a person's knowledge and freedom of action. So I leave that up to the determination of God. And when it comes to last rites, even somebody who receives last rites after they have lapsed into unconsciousness, the church teaches that those sacraments can still be effective if the person's disposed to receive them.
Very good.
And again, that's something I can't judge.
Okay, and that's where we got to leave it. Merle, thank you so much for your call. Here is Vicki now in Wilmington, North Carolina, also listening today on YouTube. Vicki, what's on your mind?
Hi, Dr. Andrews and Tom. Thank you so much. I love your show, and I watch it every day. And I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible.
Okay.
So in 2009, I had a disagreement with my sister-in-law, which is my brother's wife, who's 10 years younger than me. He and I, out of 6 kids, we're the absolute closest. And the disagreement had to do with a family wedding where my sister-in-law at the last minute insisted that her parents and her sister who's a lesbian, that her wife attend at the family table, and I was kicked off. And, it was all about, I was like, why does your sister and her wife have to attend? Anyway, so she has worked diligently to separate me from my family since 2009. And, it's been very painful and very stressful because she did a really good job of keeping me away from everybody and not allowing me to go to any family events. Now, in February of this year, her daughter died tragically. And because my brother was 10 years younger than me, he was basically like I raised him. My mother had mental illness, and he was like my child. And so when his child died, all I wanted to do was be there for him, which I couldn't. But I did go this summer to that we have a family summer home, and I went and stayed in a different apartment. But and I saw my brother, and I tried to run to my sister-in-law and hug her, and she just ran in the opposite direction as fast as she could.
Yeah, Vicki, how can we help you today?
Okay, so the thing is that she's told my brother that she will never forgive me, she will never have anything to do with me, and that she intends to just keep it like that. But my brother told me, he said she will not talk about you to any family members. This is just between her. I just recently found out that she is now working on my family members so that I can never be a part of the family again.
Okay, David. Yeah, you know what? We're kind of running short on time here. David, any thoughts?
This is just a tragic story.
Oh, it really is.
Heartbreaking. It's terribly sad, and my heart goes out to you. And I'm so sorry for the wound in your family and for the loss of this daughter. And it just sounds like a big mess.
Yeah.
And so, what can we do about it? Well, a little bit beyond the purview of this show, which tends to be more apologetical and theological. This is kind of Dr. Popchak and Dr. Garendi's, this is kind of their can of worms. But I'll do the best I can. Although I would advise you also to talk to the therapists we have on the air. They deal with this kind of stuff all the day. Number one, you can't control anybody else.
Yeah.
You really can't, And I tell a lot of people when they say, how can I make my relative, maybe come back to the church or become Catholic or do whatever, I really don't think we can do much beyond exemplifying the virtues that we think they lack by not being Catholic. The whole point of being Catholic is that I can grow in charity and virtue and wisdom and prudence and these things, and by charity and virtue be united to God. So presumably, if you think somebody needs to come to church, you think that they need to grow in some charity and virtue. So my recommendation is make sure you're exemplifying the charity and the virtues that you think they lack. Not so you can lord it over them, but so that you can shine on them. Jesus says we are to be lights, not sledgehammers, right?
Sure.
And Pope Benedict, I quoted earlier, said the church grows not by proselytism, but by attraction. So be attractive, by the character of your life. Now, let's say you do that and it does not move the needle at all. I'm terribly sorry. I'm really sorry. I know how painful that is, and really I do know. I trust me, I know. And we have to learn, those of us who have suffered loss of relationships, that I can't let my happiness be dependent on changing somebody else's obstinacy.
Yeah. And
the Lord's Prayer, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," is really a prayer not to change circumstances, but to change my orientation towards life. God's will is going to be done whether I want it to or not.
Yeah.
Okay? So let my will be okay with whatever God wills. Acceptance. And that can be sometimes accepting circumstances that I don't want. And how can I find it in myself to be happy, to be faithful, to be holy, without succumbing to bitterness, without succumbing to kind of a victim mentality, to self-pity. And look, I am just awash in self-pity. I am a self-pity machine. Okay, I have it within me to carry deep bitterness and to feel aggrieved and to hold it over other people. And I can do that all day long and twice on Sunday. So I understand the depth of it. But if I don't deal with that, I'm just hurting me.
Yeah, that's all there is to it. Vicki, please know that we will be praying for you and for your situation, because we do that for all of our listeners. Thank you so much for your call. Let's go now to Sam in Austin, Texas, listening on YouTube this afternoon. Sam, what's on your mind?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I was curious about something. I didn't know if I had the right understanding of it, but I've heard where they say that the only unforgivable sin is a sin against the Holy Spirit. But within Matthew 6:14, after the Lord's Prayer, it says, "For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father also will forgive you." And then verse 15 says, "But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." So do I have that understanding correct? Where is that considered a sin against the Holy Spirit also, or I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a wonderful question. No one has ever sort of lined up those two texts that way precisely in a question to me before, so I really appreciate it. So here's how I don't, just kind of off the cuff now. I'm trying to just playing on the fly.
Sure.
Here's how I'd grasp that. What does it mean to be in union with God? What does it mean to be in union with God? It does not mean that I hold certain propositions in my mind. And a lot of people think that. A lot of people think, well, if I just believe the right things about God, then I'm good with God. And that can become, my agenda can then be, well, I'm going to go out in the world and make sure everybody believes the right things about God. I'm going to be a sledgehammer and hammer all the truth into people. But believing certain propositions about God is not what unites us to Him. What unites us to God is love. Love and the virtues. That I love the good that God is. God is love.
Yeah.
He's also rationality and truth and goodness, right? And so I'm really not in union with God unless my will is attuned to His will, to the love that He is, to the goodness that He is, to the truth that He is. In the same way that, if you strike a key on the piano, you bring another instrument nearby, it'll like pick up the resonance. the vibrations, and you'll start resonating in your guitar, if it's close enough to the piano. That's what we're like with respect to God if we're in union with him. God strikes a note, so to speak. And if we are properly attuned or ordered towards him, then it begins to ring and resonate within us as well. That's what it means to be in union with God. Now, just total forgiving love is his nature. And so if I am determined to bear a grudge against another human being, I am putting myself in a situation where it is impossible for me to be receptive to his wavelength, as it were. I'm not going to resonate with him. It's like trying to set up a middle C in a block of concrete. Like it is not going to happen, right? And so that's why I have to forgive if I want to be forgiven and reconciled to him, right? That's a slightly different, and that's gonna last like my whole life. Now, if I keep doing that, if I keep not resonating with God and settled on my determination not to forgive until the last moment of my life, until I die, at that point I will have committed the unforgivable sin, which is final impenitence.
Okay, appreciate that. And Sam, thanks so much for your call today. If you are new to EWTN, let me clue you in on one of my favorite programs that has been on the air since practically day one, and that would be Mother Angelica Live Classics. We broadcast that on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN radio and television. Our EWTN foundress, Mother Angelica, shares her timeless wit and wisdom. Just love it. Miss her a lot. You don't have to miss her, though. Check it out on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern on EWTN radio and television. David, you know that as we come into the network, I don't know how you walk in when you come in, which door you come in, but the door that I come in, there's a big, beautiful picture of Mother Angelica. And I kind of, in my heart, I say, "Good morning, Mother." I say that every day.
Well, there's more than one picture of Mother Angelica.
Yes, that's true.
Depending on, and so you can meet her at more than one entrance, but my entrance depends entirely on the traffic and where I can get a parking spot.
That's true.
And I have actually had to park off campus and run to make it to the network. But my worst episode was there was no parking spot anywhere at EWTN. It's totally taken. And as you know, there's this kind of like portico, in the middle where people go and eat lunch, but there is a driveway that goes up to it. And I was like, I got no choice. I drove up and I parked, like right in the middle, like not a parking spot. And then I got off the air, and let me tell you, security was not happy with me.
No, they weren't.
They let me know, like, you may not do that again.
Word to the wise. Leave a little bit earlier. All right, let's go to Ricky in Omaha right now, also listening on YouTube. Hey, Ricky, what's on your mind today?
Hey, guys. Thank you for taking my call. I really appreciate it. I'm a non-Catholic, but I'm investigating, and there's things in my investigation that I really found to be quite beautiful and good answers for, but there's other things that I'm struggling with, and one of those things is the bodily assumption. In particular, I don't remember if I made the statement, Pope Leo, I want to say, talking about the bodily assumption, and I'm going to butcher the statement here, but I'm paraphrasing that those that reject that have shipwrecked the faith. I guess I was just kind of confused. Is that kind of like an ex cathedra statement?
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the question. So no one, just let's talk about the nature of dogma, okay? Because this is really about a dogma. If a person does not believe a Catholic dogma, does that mean they are going to hell? And the answer to that question is no. Okay, categorically no, all right? If a person is ignorant of a Catholic dogma, and look, there are plenty of Catholics that are ignorant of Catholic dogma, okay?
Yeah.
If a person is ignorant of a Catholic dogma, does that send them to hell? No. There's only one thing that sends us to hell, and that is that our will is not conformed to God's in charity and virtue. We are saved by charity and virtue, and we are lost, by not having charity and virtue, by being self-seeking and narcissistic and proud and lustful and arrogant and all the rest of it. That's what causes us to be saved or lost. What then is the value in dogma? Well, the Catechism of the Catholic Church says that dogmas are lights, L-I-G-H-T. They illumine our path and make it secure. Dogmas are there not to be just abstract metaphysical statements that are curiosities.
Mm-hmm.
They're there to inspire us to acts of faith, hope, and charity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to move us in the life of faith. St. Augustine of Hippo, great doctor of the Catholic Church, wrote in his book On Christian Doctrine that the entire dispensation of our faith, like everything that there is to be a Catholic, is there for one reason. He says, regard it as you would a road or a chariot. Its value is in where it conveys you, and where it ought to convey you is to charity and the virtues. And that's the extent of its value, right? So take for example, the doctrine that God exists, right? Well, for a Catholic, the definition of God is the first principle, the place where all the goodness, truth, and beauty comes from. Understanding the existence of that God inspires me to be united to truth, goodness, and beauty, as opposed to the belief in some other God who has some other character, all right? Doctrine of the Trinity, which tells me that God is, a triune communion of love. Well, I could go my whole life and not know that, but knowing it, I say, okay, the community of love is not just some human convention. This is woven into the fabric of reality. St. Bonaventure has a whole book about that called The Mind's Journey into God, where he looks for traces of the Blessed Trinity in our own psychological experience as well as in the order of nature, right? That it suddenly illumines the way I see reality as a place that has the capacity to be pervaded by love, reflecting a communion of love. The doctrine has a function in my spirituality, and so on with all the doctrines. So take the doctrine of the Assumption of Mary, which we're now talking about. Principally, this is ordered toward generating the virtue of hope. When I look at the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary and I contemplate that is potentially my destiny, that can inspire the virtue of hope.
Yeah.
Right? That's how dogmas function. They have another function as well, which is to unite the people of God in a common celebration of the elements of our faith. And so, it's a way of marking out, here are the doctrines of the Catholic faith. This is what Catholics believe, and we can celebrate those with one another. And we do celebrate them. We celebrate them liturgically. We build them into a calendar so that the rhythm of our lives together as we journey towards God is marked by this celebratory and commemorative character, where we constantly call to mind these luminous and illuminating doctrines, right? But if someone is outside the Catholic faith and they don't hold these, does that mean that they are damned? The answer to that question is no. But, how sad. We invite them to consider the beauty of these things. If God brings them to faith and charity in some other way, that's God's business.
Sure.
But this is the public way that he made provision for in the church. And we invite people to consider the truth and beauty of the Catholic faith and to come join the party, so to speak.
Yes, indeed. Ricky, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that. From Omaha, let's go now to Atlanta. Here is Joe, a first-time caller, listening on The Quest. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hello. My question relates to Vatican II and its impact on the church. By perspective, I'm a cradle Catholic in my 70s, and it seems to me that after the initial craziness of how we're going to do this, Vatican II, it has slowly progressed to destroy the church in terms of where I think the church is trying to be its leaders, much to blend in with culture, no more objective right and wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, has the church gone through periods where the leaders convened the council in the past and there was great upheaval? It looked like the church was going down the tubes, but it pulled out and it came out okay? Or, nope, this is the first time we've ever done this, and that sort of thing. So it's just, I think Vatican II didn't work the way we wanted it to. What's the history of these kind of councils?
Sure. I really appreciate the question. I have to say in advance, I don't share your interpretation or assessment of the significance of Vatican II, but that being said, I can still answer the question about history. Every single council, every single ecumenical council the Church has ever held has been an occasion for profound foment and discord and violence, even warfare.
Yeah.
And so after the Council of Nicaea, which proclaimed the dogma of the Trinity, it's not like all the Arian bishops just went along with it and swallowed it and said, okay, we'll all become, Nicene Trinitarians now. No, Arianism persisted for decades in the imperial throne even, and the Arian party actively persecuted the Catholic party, and as is wont to be the case when people's lives are at stake, a lot of the bishops went back over to the Arian party, and there was a document called the Blasphemy of Sirmium. That's how it's come down to history. It was a doctrinal statement that the Arian empress had pushed on the church, and of the assembled bishops that gathered for that false council, all but 7 affirmed the so-called Blasphemy of Sirmium, which led Jerome, writing the history, to lament and say the whole world groaned to find itself Arian. Right. Wow. So like the Nicene party was a minority in the clergy and the episcopacy, and they were under great pressure, right, to conform.
Mm-hmm.
After the Council of Ephesus, the Nestorian party split, and the church went into schism. The Nestorians went into schism. Mm. Many of them fled to Persia. The world is part of the world is now Iran, and Nestorian Christianity continues to this day in disunity from the Catholic faithful. After the Council of Chalcedon in 451, the so-called Monophysite party, many of the Coptic, Eritrean, and Syrian Catholics also went into schism and split off in a sect apart. Never affirmed the Council of Chalcedon. Still don't affirm the Council of Chalcedon, and that's another wound to the church's unity. Of course, both before and after the Second Council of Nicaea, which was about the iconoclastic controversy, there was great persecution and violence. And let's not forget the Monophyllite controversy, where Maximus the Confessor lost some of his body parts and eventually his life in defending the Orthodox position. So I mean, there has hardly ever been an ecumenical council that wasn't occasioned by and resulted in chaos, warfare, persecution, heresy, you name it, right?
We've been here before.
Every single solitary time, right? Just about. I don't remember there being a huge outcry against the Fourth Lateran Council, but there's been plenty. Now, in terms of the Second Vatican Council, I think to blame sort of cultural woes of the present era or even of the church hierarchy on the Second Vatican Council is to engage in the fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is to say that because something preceded the present circumstances, it's necessarily the cause of the present circumstances. And I think that's monocausational and reductive thinking. And I just think that society and culture are far more complex and cannot be sufficiently accounted for or explained in terms of one singular historical event. For myself, for my own personal journey into the Catholic faith, Vatican II made me Catholic, among many other influences, because I found its doctrines both true to Scripture, tradition, history, reason, and so immensely salutary for me and inspired me in my love and hope in the Catholic faith. And I am a great champion, as the whole universal church is, of the Holy Ecumenical Council, Vatican II.
All right, Joe, thank you so much for your call. Hope that's helpful for you. We couldn't get to Cindy in California. Please call us back the next time that we're live. We would be very glad to put you at the head of the line. That's all you have to do, and looking forward to that. Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
We do this program Monday through Friday on EWTN Radio, 2 p.m. Eastern, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of our fantastic team, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Hey, thanks for joining us. See you next time here on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.
The most original and exclusive